Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ophthalmology Business Podcast. We help you develop your ideal practice with the help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, and more. I'm Dr. Omar Shakir, and I'm one of the co-hosts of the podcast. Every listener of this podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy at www.obacademy.org. The membership's on us, and that's our gift to you. Today, I'm excited to talk to Shareef Mahdavi. Shareef is a speaker, author, strategist, consultant, thought leader, and a patient experience expert, and of course, a good friend. Mahdavi led the US marketing launch for Vizex. He published a book called Beyond Bedside Manner, Insights on Perfecting the Patient Experience, and it was just published recently. I'm grateful to have a signed copy from you, Shareef. So welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Omar. It's great to be with you.
Yes. So our topics today is going to be the patient experience, lessons from you. So as our expert, first of all, let's start with the listeners who are listening to this podcast may not be as familiar with your book possibly. So give me the quick 2-minute pitch on your book and what it can do for them.
Sure. So I think it helps just to put this in the context of my career, which began in ophthalmology in the late 80s. And I've had a variety of roles in companies as well as a consultant and an advisor to companies as well as practices. And the real lesson that I learned, Omar, early on is that technology cannot be the only reason why patients will choose to have a procedure. And really specifically, I'm thinking about the elective procedures we have in refractive surgery, which has blossomed throughout my career. And I've had this privilege to have a hand in helping launch that. But if technology were the answer, right, the market would be much bigger than it is today, because the lasers that do LASIK today are far better than the one that was done for me to have PRK 27 years ago. And the IOLs that we have available today and that are going to continue to come out are incredible, whether it's the light adjustable lens or the multifocals. I mean, those lenses keep getting better and better. And, you know, there's a kind of a common thought that, wow, you know, the market will really grow once technology is sufficient and technology is really there. And that's just false. What I've come to realize is that if we're going to make the demand at the consumer level really big for procedures like this, we need to think differently. We need to think of our patients also as customers. And that's really the gist of the book. We need to be taking a retail approach to how we interact with customers that complements the clinical approach in how we act with our patients. They go hand in hand. It is not one at the exclusion of the other. It is not either or, it is both and. And that's what the book's all about. And it really is about just stimulating the thinking of doctors and the leaders in every practice, the administrators, the managers, to think differently about how we're going to approach this person we call the patient when it comes to helping them part with their hard-earned money and pay us for the privilege of treating them.
100%. What got you motivated to write a book specifically? You do a lot of teaching and talking and speaking on these subjects and consulting, but it's a big push to write a whole book.
Yeah.
Direction?
Well, you know, people have given me advice over the years that I respect. And it was two ophthalmologists, actually, that I think 10, 15 years ago at different times, it was John Talamo, a longtime refractive surgeon out of Boston, and Sandy Feldman out of La Jolla, California, both friends and colleagues, and said, you know, you ought to write a book. Because they had been reading, I had a monthly column in Cataract and Refractive Surgery Today for like 7 or 8 years. I wrote 1,200 words every month. And it was all, that was a result of kind of what I had learned when I ran marketing for Vizex in the mid to late 90s. And, you know, we took a procedure that didn't exist and turned it into the most widely performed elective procedure worldwide. That's what LASIK is. Whereas cataract surgery is the most widely performed surgical procedure worldwide. And it was great. It was incredible, but I think we left a lot on the table, and we still have. And the market demand for LASIK, which is below 1 million eyes a year, should easily be 5 million eyes a year or more. I mean, there are 3 million people that drop out of contact lenses every year, right? Just right there, just the market of contact lens dropouts is significant. So the book, the column, and a lot of my career has been around trying to understand this puzzle about what influences demand and what we can do collectively to make it better. Because there's a lot of people who can benefit from having refractive surgery, as you know.
100%. Yeah, I do have to commend you on that recurring column that you had, and I read almost all of them and gleaned a lot from them. In fact, I have a few questions coming up towards the end of this that we're going to get into one of the topics that you wrote about. But before we do that, let's go all the way back from the very beginning. So, how did you get here? How did you get into ophthalmology? Why did you do it? Where did that pivot come from?
Well, it's kind of funny. I think ophthalmology found me as much as I found it. I had been out of college. I worked for SmithKline Beckman, which was a large pharmaceutical company that today we know as GlaxoSmithKline. And at the time, they owned Allergan, and they owned a little company called Humphrey Instruments here in the Bay Area where I live. And as we all know the Humphrey field analyzer, and there was at once upon a time a Humphrey autorefractor and a Humphrey lens meter. Now, we have obviously OCT and other devices that come out of non-contact optometry, right? The IOL master. I mean, Zeiss took over that company and bought it from Allergan in the very early 1990s. I was working there. And so I loved ophthalmology. I went from that SmithKline program to work for Humphrey as a sales rep. I sold the Humphrey field analyzer, many of them. I went into marketing for them. And then after about 8 years, I got a call to come meet the CEO of Vizx, Charles Munnerlyn. We've all heard of the Munnerlyn formula. I mean, he was the scientist who figured out how to safely take a laser beam and apply it to a cornea to change its shape. And of course, now the math that's used to come up with the beam profiles is much more sophisticated than it was back then. But between him and Steve Trokel and some great researchers, I mean, they changed the world by coming up with the excimer laser. And I was just privileged to meet them early on, several years before there was an FDA approval. I joined the team there, and then was asked as we got approval in late '95, would I run the marketing team? Would I build a marketing team? It's an interesting bit of history that people don't know unless they've been around a while, but at one point, Alcon had the marketing rights to the Vizx laser. And so what we know today as Alcon Wavelight is actually their third excimer laser that they were distributing at different points in history. But coming back off that little bit of trivia, I've always found a love for ophthalmology. I literally fell into it. My dad retired as a pediatrician a few years ago, but I never wanted to be a doctor. And as the firstborn son of a foreign-born physician, that was unusual. Typically someone in my shoes would go on to med school, but I just didn't have a taste for it. I liked business, and I've just been so fortunate, even though I'm not a doctor, to work with so many of them over my career. And when I speak to groups, I like to remind them, in ophthalmology, I like to remind us that we are so privileged because what we do to help people see better helps people live better. And I think of vision as like an enabling technology to help people live their lives. And early on in my career, I thought of myself as a change agent, helping doctors move from Goldmann perimetry or tangent screens into automated perimetry. And at this stage of my career, I don't think that's really changed. Maybe the topic has changed. Now we're talking about patient experience and the PX movement instead of 30-2 visual fields with StatPack. But really, the challenge is the same. And I love helping doctors improve the joy of what they do, as well as the economics of what they do. I get kicks doing that. So been privileged to work since I left corporate life a little over 20 years ago. I've worked with 50 or 60 different companies, mostly in ophthalmology, mostly around product launches or product repositioning. And it's just over time, it's just kind of affected how I view the world and what matters. And of course, great technology matters. And now I think the point of my book is that it can't just be all about the technology. It's got to be about how we treat, in that proverbial sense, how we treat patients, how we take care of them, in addition to how well we clinically and surgically treat them.
Yeah, I agree. Well, you're a natural fit for the field, and the field is very lucky to have you in it. So I'm glad you found your way into ophthalmology. Had you studied marketing in college? I mean, I don't think it's a secret that you went to Michigan. I see the big M on your chest. So was that one of your undergraduate focuses?
No, it wasn't actually. I was in the psychology program and on a track to go to get a PhD. And I just decided I really didn't want to study rats in mazes. I want to get out in the world of business. And I like this notion of organizational development, organizational behavior, and what is it that makes employees happy in what they do. And I have the privilege now of, using that. I never in the role, and one of the roles I have now, we can talk about in a minute, but I took a marketing class after college. I was more a self-taught marketer. And, I think the big thing that I learned that I look back on is that I had a sales position first. And then in the same company, Little Humphrey Instruments, I went from a sales role to a marketing role. So it was the same products, just a different perspective now. And that really helped me as a product manager learn what was valuable to the customer, what was valuable to the sales rep to help that customer. And I think it really set the stage for my work with the excimer laser and Visex.
Yeah, I think they're very lucky to have had you be a part of that. And yeah, I've heard the phrase before that, sales is to close and marketing is to open, right? So you basically opened a whole market for these companies that you worked with and built it out, and a big commendation to you for doing that.
Well, there were a lot of people involved. I had a role with the marketing team, but I mean, great scientists, great sales reps, great customer service reps. And, I remember the head of service would often say, our goal every day is to never cancel a PWM. I said, Doug, what's a PWM? He said, it's what we tell our customers because they have a patient with money. And so the field service engineer was like, I want to make sure that laser is running, right? And if I have to get there at 4 a.m. to get it up and running for surgery starting at 8, I'm going to do that. That was one of the things that made Visex very special in the mid to late 90s, that just obsessive focus on the customer and making them successful. And I've never forgotten those lessons.
Absolutely. Let's jump into some more granular stuff because you have a lot of advice to give. For the listeners of this podcast, which, most of them may be intimately involved with the practice, either owners or managers of a practice, what are some easy, concrete changes that they could put in, let's say even starting tomorrow, the day they walk in, from what you know?
Sure. So the thing that really helps is to look at the practice with fresh eyes. Okay, and that's hard to do because we walk into our facility every day about the same time, and we kind of are invisible to what we see, right? But who's not invisible is the patient. So developing fresh eyes means trying to look at it as if you've never been there before. And the thing that there's one very specific thing that I like people to do, and that is to try to identify negative cues in their environment. And if you ask, what's a negative cue? Anything that gets in the way of having a great patient experience, anything that gets in the way of what you're trying to do with the patient. If you want your patient to walk in and feel like, wow, this place is modern, it's clean, they're responsive because, they're responsive, they're attentive, whatever those adjectives are that you'd like your patients to have, you need to ask yourself an honest question. Is that what my environment and my team members are conveying to the patient? Okay, so that's like a primary question. And a great place to start is that first room you walk into when you walk to the front door, which too many people still call a waiting room. Now, Omar, from the book, I'm an advocate of blowing up the waiting room, getting rid of it completely, re-engineering that space and giving it a different purpose and a function. And I think that's all possible. But I think if you just walk in and if you notice there's stains on the carpet, that's something you might want to think about changing your carpet. If you notice surfaces are dusty, you've got to have your custodial staff make sure they wipe those surfaces, right? If you see a sloppy pile of magazines, you got to clean it up, right? COVID changed everything as well, right? We don't want to have so many things people are touching anymore. We want to make more things digital. But I think the place to start is that room that creates the first impression when people walk into your practice. And if you can spend some time there, literally, it might be taking a bunch of, you might notice like, wow, we've got pamphlets everywhere. We've got little pamphlet holders everywhere. I think of that as like junk, right? And getting rid of that. because it's like, what do you want the patient to focus on? Okay, so that's kind of the physical environment. What's up on the walls? If you haven't changed your prints for 40 years, you need to have the prints changed, right? The pictures on the wall, because they're likely outdated. People go, this looks like a 1980s facility. Well, guess what? If people walk in and see that, you've now just made it harder for you later on in their journey. You've made it harder for the physician or the counselor to convincingly say, you should have a procedure with us and you should pay 5, 10, or 15,000 or whatever you charge for what you're doing, because it started off on the wrong foot. So I like to start at the first place right there. Okay, that's an easy one. I'll give you another one, which is just take a look at different rooms and take a look at, we just take the scent. Let's just look at, how does the room smell, right? Because it's really easy now. You can go and get botanicals and put a little drop on a piece of tissue paper and put it at the beginning of the day in a wastebasket in a room. The whole room's going to smell a lot better. And you can do different scents in different rooms. But just, we don't do enough. And it's funny, we're in the vision business, right? We're in the make people see better, but that's only one of 5 senses, right? So if you think about creating an experience that appeals to multiple senses, not just what we see, but what do we hear when we walk in? Are we hearing a lot of chatter of employees, or are we hearing nice, soft classical music in the background, right? What do we smell? Just talked about that one, right? What about surfaces that we touch, whether we sit on them or put our hands on them? Are they clean, right? Because they're not always clean. And I've not walked into a practice that I couldn't find something, wrong. Some do it a lot better than others, but most really miss this stuff because it becomes invisible, right? And then most importantly is our people. How are we greeted? Do you have the front desk also answering the telephone? Because if they are, they're on the phone. They can't pay attention to the person that just walked in. I really advocate separating those and having a different space in the practice where people answer phones, from patients who are calling in. Are we greeting people? Are we making them feel welcome as if it were our home, right? Because we're trying to build a bond. We're trying to get people to like us and trust us. And it all starts when they walk in the front door. I think of this as the door-to-door experience. What happens from the time they get out of their car door to the time they get back in their car door? And every step along the way can be choreographed. And we just looked at really just the waiting, what was the waiting room, like the front room, right? But then it extends to exam rooms and testing rooms, and everything can be planned in such a way that we minimize waiting, which is the hardest thing. That's the number one complaint patients have, and it's the number one problem doctors face, right? About, oh my gosh, people are waiting. So I'll give you another concrete thing. If someone is made to wait longer than whatever your standard is, and it should be, well, I get them back in a few minutes. Does your receptionist have a stack of Starbucks $10 cards? Say, we are so sorry we made you we are so sorry you had to wait extra day. Your next mocha or latte is on us. People feel good, right? Do we have a system that allows us to contact patients if things get really out of whack and we're running an hour or 2 behind? Do we have a system that says we're going to contact patients and reschedule or tell them to come in an hour later so they're not wasting their time? Okay. Do we have things they can do besides filling out forms on clipboards when they get there that actually add value educationally? Because clipboard stuff shouldn't happen. That should all happen at home before they ever get there. They fill stuff out ahead of time, right? And preferably online. So those are just some of the things, but I like to start at the front entrance because that's the obvious glaring point.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. That's easy to do tomorrow for anyone who walks into their practice, just to see.
You can't change the carpet maybe tomorrow, but you can certainly tidy things up, right?
Yeah. And how often does a doctor, at least I can speak for myself, walk in through the front door? Not enough, right? So we don't know sometimes what they're seeing.
An ophthalmologist told me once that he had a consultant come in and they taught the front desk how to smile more. Like literally when the patient had come to smile, conversion rate went up 10%, nothing else changed. I mean, it's these little things that we don't think about. That's why who you have at the front is so important. They've got to be a warm, welcoming person. They can't be a bitter individual. That doesn't work well.
No, that won't make your patient experience exceed. So, those are kind of very straightforward maneuvers to assess what is that patient experience in your own practice. But what are some other methods that doctors can use to get behind the scenes patient experience assessment?
Well, certainly the best feedback tool I think you have are, there's two. One is reviews. And I think soliciting reviews is important. I mean, I just published a blog where I had to I had to have a colonoscopy, and I chose differently than the doctor I was referred to simply based on the number of views and reading a few reviews. So I think doctors tend to underestimate what patients are doing, which is they're going to look you up online first before they ever call your practice. And reviews are a great feedback loop. It's okay to get negative reviews because they should spur you to want to change and do better. So that's important. That's like a unofficial patient survey. But I think also surveying your patients and asking them, I think formally asking them and doing it on a regular basis. And there are electronic tools out there, but you can go low tech. You can literally either email or send them in a mail. Would you please just fill out the survey, stick it in the envelope, and send it back? Your comments are anonymous, but they'll help us improve. It can be as low tech as that, or a little higher tech. Set up something on a Survey Monkey account or something similar that you control and have people, send them emails to fill out. And I have it on my website. They can go see the 13 questions. They can download it for free. The 13 questions that really matter when you're trying to get feedback from patients on how to make the experience better. But those are things you've got to ask people. We use at the Laser Eye Center that I run, we actually use text, and we do send a text to every patient who's been in that day for a consultation. And what we want to know is a simple question: how would you rate your experience today on a 1 to 10 scale? And then once they answer, the program we use just comes back with a second question, and it's called Delighted. Delighted is a survey tool out there that other practices use. We ask, why did you rate it what you rated it? Why'd you rate it a 7? Why'd you rate it a 10? And it's great. And the data, we get about 50% of the people responding to that, so it's a valid sample. And we get more than 40% of those that respond actually leave a comment. And we score very well, but I pay attention to the negative comments more than I do the positive ones, because that's where the gold is. You don't learn and improve by people telling you how good you are. you have to look at the data where people telling you your baby is not as pretty as you thought it was, right? And your ego has to be in check to accept that and say it's all about just trying to make us better.
Yeah, coming off of that, I have a nuanced question for you. And reading one of your columns about this, so you mentioned before that few patients, especially in our field, few customers are going to complain because they want to say good things about their doctor, and there's a tendency to want to please your doctor or your surgeon, or say that an outcome was good when it maybe wasn't, which means that even fewer patients with legitimate issues are going to leave a complaint or go through the emotions to give that as a feedback somewhere. How do you sift through? How do you get through that bias, first of all, to get to actionable complaints that you can start to work on?
Like all that saying, like if you see a cockroach, there's probably more than one cockroach. You got an infestation, right? It's kind of like if you get one complaint of something on an issue, it's a very high likelihood that other people are feeling that same problem. Yeah. This is not just a problem in medicine, by the way. Only 1 out of every 25 people, or 4% of people with a complaint, will actually complain. 24 out of 25 people just kind of stuff it down and don't say anything, but they still feel bad about it. So we have to so yes, you could say there's a bias, but I look at it a little differently, Omar. I think it's just like, wow, it was a gift. The fact that one person was brave enough to say something. So first of all, what we do is we thank them profusely. Okay. And the question I like to ask is, what can we do to make this better? I don't tell them we're going to do something. I ask them what we can do, because we all have situations sometimes where we either want to refund the money or part of something or give them something free, but you need to say what they want. Some people say, just the fact that you listened to me and acknowledged that it's a problem and you're going to do something about it is all I need. And they're happy about that. Other people are like, I think it would be really fair if you did X, whatever X is, right? And chances are, if that's what will make it happy and it's not something really silly, like, give me $10,000 on that. If it's just something, do it and empower your team to do it, right? That's what you want to do, because the patient will feel better. And you, as the practice, have the opportunity always to write the next chapter in the story. Okay. That's the thing that's so great. You don't have to put up with this. It's not something you've got to just tolerate. You thank them. You never blame. You don't blame your customer. You don't make excuses. You just thank them and say, we're going to use that to make it better. And, I've written apology letters, and sometimes I never hear from the customer again. And sometimes I do. And that's just the way of it. But you have to have done your part. Right. And I would worry less about the bias. I understand what you're saying, but I think the more relevant information is you got some data that said, oh, you didn't do as well as I expected. Right. And we all have patients that can be unreasonable, demanding, and have expectations that are off the chart. And our goal is to bring those expectations back in line.
No, I totally agree with you. And that on your advice, we do the same, which is every time we hear even one complaint, we investigate that further. It's not just one and done. And my comment about the bias is actually the opposite of what most of the listeners are probably thinking. It's not that everyone's biased towards leaving negative reviews. It's actually that you're not getting enough of the negative reviews because people don't want to potentially give bad feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes
yeah,
negative reviews are goofy. I mean, you read something, you say, wait, we can't, they have kind of a weird name on Google. And because if we see something, we will contact the patient. We see something serious. It's rare, but sometimes they're just kind of goofy. I mean, sometimes we get a negative rating because they weren't a candidate. So they give us a bad rating, right? Now that you look at that and say, okay, well, that's not our fault. In fact, we pride ourselves on telling people you're not a candidate, do not have refractive surgery, right? We think that's actually a good thing, right?
Absolutely.
Even if they've been told somewhere else they should have it, we'll tell them why. We'll always explain our rationale. And we say, we're not going to do a procedure on you because it's not in your best interest. And, okay, so they don't like that. All right, I understand. But yeah, you got to respond. And you're right. It's hard. It's so rare that you want to treat it really like special. And I think there's another opportunity. I think maybe if you are doing a procedure, maybe 30 to 60 days afterwards, to send them a longer survey, not a one question, not a, you'd willingly recommend your friends and family, not that, but kind of more thoughtful stuff where they might think, that was something that bothered me that they remembered a month later, right? And give them permission. In those kind of surveys, it's important to give them permission to, hey, if there's a staff member you recall that did a great job, fine. And if we fell down, we'd really like to know that because that's how we want to make things better. So it's being very overt about that in writing and encouraging them to give you that feedback. And then most important is you as the leader of the practice, not going ballistic on who made the error, but using it as a teaching moment and a coachable opportunity. Now, if the employee is making the same mistake over and over, maybe they're in the wrong role or shouldn't be in the practice. But it's really important not to come back to the office or not to read something and go ballistic, right? It's really important not to do that because that will just make it harder for your staff to speak up when they see things that aren't the way they should be, because they're also a great source of improvement as well in terms of what they see.
1000%. Now, you obviously bring a lot of passion to this topic, and I advised a ton of doctors and practices to get better at this. What's your biggest frustration in doing these workshops and trying to help these practices get to a better place? What have you seen that we all can avoid that frustration that you have in taking on your advice?
I'll give you 3 real quick ones. Number 1 is, as human beings, we tend to think we're better than we really are. So I've had many doctors tell me, oh, our customer service is great. I go, really? Really? How do you know, right? So an overinflated view of self. So it's being willing to kind of, humble ourselves and say, wait a minute, no, we're not as good as we think. And that's been well documented in the literature from CEOs who all thought, their company had great customer service. And you ask the customers, and the customers say, no, you don't, right? Onward. I think I mentioned that one in the book. So that would be number 1. Number 2 would be, I guess, a derivative of that, just not taking this seriously, saying, no, it's really about technology, or it's really about, oh, if we just lower our price, more people have it done. We've shown empirically those things are not true. And I just think patient experience, it really deserves to be taken seriously because it's the one thing that if you unlock it, you're going to have business off the charts. And the reason is because medicine as a whole, the standard is so low. Patient expectations are so low because they're used to walking in and being treated poorly by the staff and by the doctor in rundown facilities, right? That if you do just a little investment, you're going to get an outsized return. And my frustration is the doctor that's not willing to do a little investment. It isn't even about knocking down walls or new paint or anything, just making a little investment. And then I think the third thing would be the opposite. They try to do too much. They go, wow, this is all great. And they try to do too much. And many things fail because they took on too much. Well, I recommend just start with one thing at a time. I give lots of potential ideas. Pick one. Pick one. Get some success. Help people feel good in the practice. See the more smiles from your customers. Like, well, wait, what should we do next? Because you have to prioritize. So those would be some of my frustrations. And I guess I'll expand it a little bit more. I'm really surprised. Book's been out a little while now. I'm surprised more companies aren't getting behind this, Omar. And I've started having conversations with some of my friends who are KOLs. I say, we should work together because it's in the company's best interest. If the patient experience is better, just think about it. If every refractive surgeon had a better patient experience, well, that would mean more premium IOLs are ordered, right? More LASIK key cards, right? More LipiFlow activators, right? More of everything that patients are paying for. They're going to have more product pull through. The companies will benefit because this whole thing about patient experience is better for the patient. Patients like it more. The staff gets more engaged. The doctors find more joy in their work. And industry sells more of their stuff. So I'd say the missing piece right now is getting industry really behind this movement. Whether it's my book, other people, doesn't matter. The whole notion of bringing this to the front and center, I think, is going to be really important going forward because that's how we're going to grow things. That's how we're going to overcome declining reimbursements in Medicare. Medicare is not going to pay you more money. They're only going to pay you less, and expenses continue to go up. So the antidote to this, focus on a better experience, invest in that more than investing in advertising. Make patients happy because patients have a great experience, will tell other people. That's how you get the word of mouth, right? Differentiate based on experience. And I think a rising tide is going to lift all boats.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. And that leads into my last question, which is kind of prognostication from here going forward. Where do you see the economy, if we call it the global economy of ophthalmology, going? Do you see that there's going to be more dilution of our worth to society? Do you think there's going to be an awakening of our value? Where do you think we're actually going to go?
It's a great question, and I'll just give you some top of mind thoughts. I think it's a great time for anyone in medical school who's thinking about, I might want to go into an ophthalmic residency. Yeah, go for it. I think ophthalmology is the best specialty among all the specialties because of one simple thing. What we do, someone walks in, and look at LASIK, someone walks in and an hour later they're walking out, they don't need glasses. This is unheard of, right? It's the most, I think Lance Kugler was saying that LASIK is the most studied, scrutinized procedure in all of Western medicine ever. And, incredibly safe, right? So come back to what does that mean for us? Well, great time to go in ophthalmology. There's always going to be innovation in this space. It's going to be cyclical. And we heard at the last iCelerated meeting that right now there's less investment. That's okay. Things go up and down in terms of investment, but people are always going to value their eyesight as their most precious sense, is my prediction, right? So, and we have more ophthalmologists retiring. So the demand on you and everyone else who's sticking around is only going to go up. And just because of that, you're going to see, if your percentage of people who choose premium IOLs don't change, you'll do more premium IOLs just because you're going to be seeing more patients, right? So I think the prognosis is very, very good. And the goal that I see is not to allow your value to be defined economically by a third party, namely Medicare or insurance. And I've worked with practices that have as an explicit goal continue to increase the percentage of their revenue over time that comes from the patient paying directly for services. Because insurance is not great, right? We all have insurance, but very few have coverage. I don't see that getting better. And if we go to a one payer, single payer system, then we'll be like most other Western countries, and that's fine. That's fine. But guess what? There'll be a second tier where patients pay directly, and you need to be competitive in that space. And the way you get competitive is by focusing on customer service and customer experience for your patients. So I think this goes hand in hand with where the future is going. I have a rosy outlook. I've been doing this, for decades now. I think ophthalmology will continue to prosper and do well, but you can't just sit back and wait for it to happen. You can't expect that, reimbursements are going to change. It's not going to happen. They're going to continue to go down. And because Medicare just can't afford it. So take control of your own destiny. That's the message.
Excellent, Shareef. Thanks so much. I mean, we could talk for hours on these topics. You're a wealth of knowledge. So thanks for taking the time to sit down and talk with me.
It was a pleasure, Omar, and I've just really got to say I've been watching, you in person at some of the conferences, speaking online, and I just really love what you're doing. You are an exemplar of the PX movement, and you're doing it there at Coastal Eye. And I just wish you all the continued success because we want practices like yours. They're out there. There are a growing number of practices that have dedicated themselves, and I meet the doctors and I see what they're doing and they're outperforming their peers. They're outperforming their peers on pretty much every metric. And the most important one is joy. And you have joy, and I appreciate knowing you.
Thank you, Shareef. Yeah, you're a friend for a reason. You bring joy into my life. So I want to take a moment and thank our listeners as well. We appreciate each and every one of you as well. We can't do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, please share it with your friends and family on social media. Also, please don't forget to write a review on iTunes and Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. Till we meet again, wishing you all an amazing week ahead.